You don't have to be religious to be pro-life. I know that sounds odd, but for some reason, being pro-life is often dismissed as something only spiritual or religious people believe in. The stereotype is familiar to us all: conservative Christians trying to force their beliefs onto everyone else. Now, as a practicing Roman Catholic, my faith certainly does inform my pro-life beliefs. But what if someone opposes abortion and isn't religious at all? What if for them the issue has nothing to do with the church, scripture, or dogma, and everything to do with basic universal ethics? That is where people like former SPUCTV guest Herb Geraghty of Secular Pro-Life, who I interviewed last year, stand. They are not pro-life because of religious belief. They are pro-life because they believe human life has value, and because science makes one thing undeniably clear. From the earliest stage of development, the unborn child is a living human being. That statement is not theology, it is biology. At fertilisation, a new, genetically distinct human begins to exist. From that point onward, development is continuous. Within weeks, the heart begins forming and beating. Arms, legs, organs, and brain activity all begin developing long before birth. None of this depends on religious belief. These are all observable biological facts. So the next time someone tells you anti-abortion campaigners are all religious fanatics, tell them that they're wrong. I'm William Curry, and this is my Viewpoint. So if at fertilisation, a new genetically distinct human begins to exist, and they do, then the real debate is not whether the unborn are alive or human. The debate is whether some human lives deserve protection and others do not. Many people argue that personhood depends on independence, awareness, consciousness, or being wanted. But history should make us very cautious whenever societies start assigning human value based on capability, dependency, or usefulness. A newborn baby, as we all know, is dependent. A disabled person may be dependent. An elderly person with dementia may lack awareness. Yet we still recognise their humanity and their right to live. So why should the unborn be the exception? This is not about controlling women. It is about whether a vulnerable human life matters, even when that life is small, unseen, and unable to speak for itself. And in a society that claims to care about human rights, I believe that question deserves more honest discussion than insults about, quote, religious zealots or fanatics. The moment people hear pro-life, many stop listening before the conversation even begins. They assume the argument is rooted in scripture or in a desire to control women. But opposition to abortion does not require belief in God any more than opposition to murder, abuse, or violence requires belief in God. Most of us already accept a very simple moral principle. All human life has value and deserves protection. Believing in God helps to explain why, but most of us still believe that simple truth. The disagreement begins when we ask one difficult question: when does human life begin to matter? Scientifically, the answer to when a human begins is not especially controversial. At conception, a new and genetically distinct human life exists. From that point onward, development is not a transformation from non-human to human. It is the continuous development of an already existing human being. A fetus is not a different type of life from us. It is simply a younger stage of the same life. That matters because human rights have traditionally been based on what someone is, not on what they can currently do. We do not say a person loses value because they are unconscious, dependent, disabled, or unable to survive on their own. Human worth is supposed to be inherent, yet abortion creates an exception to that principle. The unborn child may be small, dependent, and unseen, but those qualities do not make them less human. They only make them more vulnerable. And historically, societies are judged by how they treat the vulnerable. Of course, abortion is often discussed in difficult circumstances, such as poverty, fear, abuse, health concerns, or feeling completely unprepared for parenthood. These situations deserve compassion, not judgment. But compassion should not require us to deny what abortion is. If the unborn child is human, and biologically they are, then abortion is not merely ending a pregnancy, it is ending a developing human life. That reality is uncomfortable, but uncomfortable truths do not stop being true simply because they're emotionally difficult. At the centre of the abortion debate is a question most people rarely ask directly. What makes someone worthy of human rights? Is it intelligence, self-awareness, independence, the ability to survive alone? Because if those are the standards, then human value becomes conditional. A premature baby is less developed than a full-grown adult. A person in a coma lacks awareness. Someone with severe disabilities may never live independently. Yet we all should still recognise their humanity, because human worth is not supposed to depend on ability. Human rights are meant to protect humans precisely when they are weak, dependent, or vulnerable. And no human being is more vulnerable than the unborn. That's why I struggle with the modern conversation around abortion. The language often avoids the reality of what is happening. We say termination. We say removing tissue. We say ending a pregnancy. But none of those phrases answer the central question: what exactly is being terminated? Put simply, it's a developing human. And this is where many secular pro-life people feel politically homeless. If you're religious, critics can dismiss your argument as faith-based. If you're non-religious, critics often assume you secretly have religious motives anyway. But there is nothing irrational about believing human life deserves protection before birth. In fact, one could argue that a society should be judged by how it treats humans who are powerless, voiceless, and completely dependent on others. Part of the problem is that modern society increasingly defines value through convenience and autonomy. We celebrate independence so much that dependency itself begins to look like a weakness, or even disqualification from personhood. But every single one of us began life dependent. None of us earned our right to exist through intelligence, productivity, or usefulness. We were protected before we could contribute anything at all. That principle, that human life has value simply because it is human, is one of the foundations of human rights itself. Once that principle becomes negotiable, the consequences reach far beyond abortion. I understand that many women presenting for abortions face fear, pressure, and loneliness. Compassion matters, support matters, care matters. Religion isn't required to recognise that a developing human life exists in the womb. And religion isn't required to believe that vulnerable human beings deserve protection. That is not extremism. That is simply a belief that human rights should apply to all humans, especially the smallest ones. Perhaps people will still dismiss the pro-life position as outdated, religious, or extreme. But quite frankly, I don't care. But I do not believe it is extreme to ask whether human rights should apply to human beings before birth. I don't believe it's extreme to question a culture that increasingly measures human value through independence, convenience, and usefulness. And you don't need religion to recognise the humanity of the unborn. You only need consistency. Because if human rights are to mean anything at all, they cannot belong only to the strong, the wanted, or the visible. They must also belong to the vulnerable, especially when they have no voice of their own.